Welcome to Shardlight Radio, the Argent Saga podcast, featuring interviews, card reviews, deck analysis, and much more. Shardlight Radio is your source to everything happening in the world of Argos. And we're back on Shardlight Radio. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and on today's episode, I want to talk about Enemy of My Enemy. I got my start. This is going to be a long walk. I got my start in collectible card games playing Magic the Gathering during the Ice Age, Weatherlight era, somewhere in there. I think Weatherlight was the newest expansion when I got started, but the group I played with had a ton of Ice Age and Mirage cards, so I don't remember the exact timeline. It was a long time ago. I played Magic for quite a few years, and then I discovered Versus System, which rekindled that obsession and took it to a much higher level. When I saw this CCG style game that I could play as Batman in, it really got my attention. And then the mechanics, to this day, I think the original Versus System did some things mechanically that set it just in another league. The integrated turn structure, where you didn't so much go first as you went first during that turn, and then in the subsequent turn two, somebody else went first during turn two. I guess Legends of Runeterra sort of has attempted to use an integrated turn structure, but it's not nearly as elegant as it was in old Versus System. Plus the IP of Marvel and DC Comics being able to fight each other. I loved old Versus. I played a tremendous amount of old Versus, and for anyone who was familiar with that game, search was extremely important. Now, the reason search was important to such a degree was because the size of the units that you put in play scaled up extremely quickly. Your typical cost of a 1-drop would be like a 1-1, a 2-drop would be like a 3-3, but by turn 6, you're talking about a 12-12, and the 7 and 8 drops scaled up even higher, even quicker. I think 4 drops were 9-9s maybe, so there were these breakpoints where there were huge jumps, so the punishment for missing a drop on a turn was huge. The teams that didn't have the ability to play plot twist to search or cast spells to search for drops were just less viable than teams that had on-team search. So like Gotham Knights had the bat signal to go search for a Gotham Knight. That automatically makes that team significantly better than other somewhat similarly powered leveled teams that lacked search. So when Versus eventually introduced generic search, it was the lubricant that made many decks work. And out of the two kind of most famous generic search cards, Enemy of My Enemy was the first one that came into the game, and I think it probably saw more play because of how the card worked. The other card that I mentioned there was Mobilized. That card essentially let you search on team for something. Enemy of My Enemy let you search off team, and as anyone who builds combo decks is familiar with, it's generally better to have access to a wider variety of options than be stuck on one team. So Enemy of My Enemy was a plot twist that you couldn't play until turn 3. In Versus, you didn't actually pay resources to play plot twists, but they were thresholded. So a plot twist that had a cost of 3 could be played on turn 3 and any turn thereafter, roughly. That's people who are familiar with the game are going to critique the details of that, but just it's not super important. Anyway, what Enemy of My Enemy did was, as an additional cost to play Enemy of My Enemy, discard a character card. So character is a unit. Search your deck for an affiliated character that does not share a printed affiliation with the card you discarded. Reveal that card, put it into your hand, shuffle your deck. So what this facilitated was you could take two teams that didn't have natural search, and as long as you had a card available that you could pitch that was opposite the team that you wanted to search for, you could go find your unit. So this allowed you to build your deck with maybe options at each drop And depending upon the composition of your hand, you could always have something that you could go and search for that was relevant. This card art depicts, I believe it's Sebastian Shaw. It's the head guy of the Hellfire Club shaking hands with Magneto. So enemy of my enemy. They're making a deal against the X-Men. The reason I'm going on and on about this old Versus card, and it is important to say old Versus, because Versus system as a game has been remade, and there is now the Versus System 2PCG, which is my other favorite game, my other long-running podcast, and that's really a distinct thing from old Versus. Anyway, there's been a water card that has been revealed, which, as anyone who listens to the show knows, I'm a big fan of playing water, and the card art is Aiton and Jamail shaking hands, very similarly framed to Enemy of My Enemy with Shaw and Magneto, and this card's called Enemy of My Enemy. It's a spell instead of a plot twist, but so in Versus, character cards were red, locations were green, locations kind of like enchantments, if you think about it that way, or like augments in Argent Saga, and spell cards, the plot twists in Versus were blue. So Enemy of My Enemy in old Versus was a blue card. Enemy of My Enemy in Argent Saga is a water card, so it's also blue, which I really love. And the effect of this card is play only if your champion and spirit are different elements. As an additional cost to play this card, discard a unit whose element is the same as your champion, search your deck for a unit with the same element as your spirit, and add it to your hand. Oh my goodness. The flavor text on this is Aiton saying, "Did we just become friends?" and Jamail saying, "I hate you," which I find delightful. So the effect of this card, I'm speechless, apparently. First of all, mechanically within Argent Saga, I think this is really cool. Vabriel's Final Gift has not proven to be game-breaking. There was some amount of chicken littling about that card, and that has not been borne out, but it is a completely viable and useful card. And the idea that now we have a card that creates an incentive for you to play different champions and spirits, which we kind of already have. I mean, I touched on this before, that the ability to have a larger variety of options is typically better than fewer options. So if I'm only playing air, there's a whole lot of cards I can't put in my deck. But if I'm playing air, water, then I have a larger, it just makes sense that having more options generally, now not always, I mean, there are times where you want to go into a mono color, but it's probably not going to be your strongest choice most of the time. So just based on the way Argent Saga is structured, playing a mixed deck with something splashed in is generally the way to go. So this card already is fitting into something that you as a player want to do. The one thing I don't care for is that you have to discard a unit that matches your champion, and you have to search for a unit that matches your spirit. Now, I will concede, so your spirit is your splash color, and generally you're going to be more likely to have one of the 32 cards that matches your champion than one of the 8 cards that matches your spirit, just in terms of raw numbers. So if they are going to lock this to the discard always has to match one or the other, making it match the champion is absolutely the right choice. Along the exact same lines of thinking, the element of card that you are less likely to have in your hand is going to match your spirit, so you're going to be more likely to want to search for a card that matches your spirit. So if they're gonna lock it in place, I think this is the right way to lock it. What I would have preferred, though, is discard a card whose element matches either your champion or spirit, and search your deck for a card that matches whichever one you didn't discard for, and give you that flexibility. They didn't choose to do it that way. So mechanically, are you ever going to play this card if you're running Fizzy as your spirit? I'm not sure. It seems unlikely to me. It seems that the real likelihood is this is going to be a water champion deck, and you're going to use Enemy of My Enemy to search. Oh man, it feels good to say that again. You're going to use Enemy of My Enemy to search out something that you have fewer copies of that match your spirit, whatever color that is. I mean, there's a variety of different decks where you could use Jillian or Jamail and a different color spirit. So I think this card definitely can see some play. Probably you're not going to play this super early in the game. I think this is more likely that you're going to use this to search out those one-of legendary bomb cards, or to make sure that you have all the pieces you need for some kind of a combo deck. So I don't know that this is going to necessarily see play in every blue deck. Plus, it doesn't let you search for colorless units, and the Argent units have really been kind of some key things. You think about Twilight Knight, like what's a card that you might want to search out late game? Some a utility piece like that, or the Elephant if you're playing a Swarm deck. Mechanically, I think this card is solid. It will almost certainly show up in Jamail and Jillian lists. Again, I'm a little shakier on if I'm going to run Fizzy and I'm going to commit this card, what I'm searching for has to be one of my other blue cards. So I guess if you're building a deck where you want Mei Yu and you just absolutely have to have Mei Yu, this could work to essentially give your deck a pseudo 4 copies of Mei Yu. You've got the original plus 3 copies of Enemy and My Enemy. So I don't think that's impossible. I just think it's probably going to have more use cases where you have a higher density of blue cards and you're searching for whatever your splash color is. But not only, I mean, Mei Yu is a pretty impactful card. And actually, the new Jillian is ridiculous. So once we get our hands on Ascension cards, my analysis of how valuable this is as a splash card may change a little bit. The last thing that I kind of want to touch on, I started this by rambling about my love of old verses, and that is real. To this day, I'm still a tremendous fan of that game. And to see these elements of old verses, the name of the card, the way the card art's framed, the functionality of it, brought into this game of Argent Saga, just... It is such a delightful experience. When Old Versus was canceled, cancellation actually was announced on my birthday, or maybe a couple days, but right around my birthday, the year it got canceled, and it just was the worst feeling. Like, I felt like this was my game, I was going to play this forever, and it didn't work out that way. Now, when I discovered Argent Saga at Gen Con last year, it really felt like a Frankenstein style creation of, I recognize this element from here and I recognize that element from here. And there were so many things about the game that were kind of recognizable, but polished and fitted together with other best elements from different card games that I like how you can see the patchwork, but the game doesn't feel patchwork. It feels polished. It feels really solid. And this card, this translation of a beloved, cherished, at one time the most expensive card in the game of Old Versus. And if you're an Old Versus player, you know what I'm talking about. The passion for this game, even a decade and a half after the game was canceled, the passion among the player base that's still around is still there. People still play this game, and it's been dead for longer than my kids have been alive. I guess that's an example that only resonates with me. Bad example. Okay, so I'm not sure I can fully articulate how cool I think it is to see these elements from a very beloved part of one of my very favorite ever card games woven so seamlessly into the world of Argent Saga. This indicates to me that there is presence on the design team of people who have kind of a deeper understanding, not just about how card games work and what would be good design, but that understand the kind of nostalgia and the love that the player base develops for certain elements of these games that we play. I'm not saying this means the team can't ever do anything wrong. I'm still perfectly willing to offer criticism when I see things that look insane, such as that new Jillian card, which I'm not going to talk about today. But for this card, for this moment, on this episode, all I can do is sit here slack-jawed and just say, well done. Well done, gentlemen. Go win some games. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Shardlight Radio. Remember to follow us on Facebook. If you like the show and want to support what we're doing, join us at patreon.com/thebuildphase to find out how. Special thanks to Ben Rueg for our fantastic new theme music, and until next time, go win some games.